Hello everyone! In this video, I'm going to talk about how to use rig controllers to pose a character and how to make these poses as expressive as possible, because good poses are the foundation of good animation. So, it's time to try a more complex character than just a cube. For example, any of the standard models. First of all, it is important to remember that you are moving all those points that you have selected, and that some points can affect others. Double-clicking on a point, select all points lower in the hierarchy. Double-click on the point at the base of the palm. The palm can now be rotated. You can change the pivot by right-clicking on another point. The three selected points now rotate around this point. Note that this shifts the palm point. This point is connected to the elbow points, so when it shifts, the elbow will also shift a little bit, and if the shift is very strong, it will also affect the points of the shoulder and clavicle. You can also translate the palm points, and it will affect the posture of the whole arm. It is not recommended to move the hand by selecting only one main point. This almost always gives an attractive break. Sometimes it is possible to move the arm slightly by moving the extreme points. However, this should be done carefully. You can fix points in a certain place of the scene. To do that, select them and press the R hotkey. A red frame will appear around the fixed points. Now these points will not follow the others. They will stay in place until you select them and move them yourself. Such fixation will not affect the animation in any way. So, this function is needed only when I do not want to accidentally move this point while moving the others. Remove the fixation by pressing the R key again. The best way is to work with all three points, constantly switching between the translator and rotator manipulators. It is convenient to use the E and W hotkeys for this. Once you have set the position of the palm and elbow, it is important not to forget about the shoulders and clavicles. If the arm is up, the shoulder can't be down. It looks very unnatural. Select 2 points of the shoulder and put the pivot on the clavicle. It is important to check how the pose looks from different angles. Check how the pose looks from above too. The arm is now bent back, and the shoulder remains in place at the same time. It looks like someone is pulling the character's arm back, while at the same time pushing against his back. When you rotate the shoulder, this pose will look more natural. But in this case, if I want a simple relaxed pose, it would be better to rotate the whole arm slightly forward. This can be easily done by selecting all points of the arm. You can rotate the arms step by step. This helps to keep an eye on the shoulders and achieve natural poses. First, select all points of the shoulder and arm by double-clicking on the clavicle point. Then rotate them slightly in the desired direction. And then select only the points of the arm and now rotate it completely. In this way, the shoulders now takes a more natural position. Rotating the whole arm from the shoulder is convenient when the pose is part of a sweeping motion. But sometimes it's important to have the palm in a certain position, for example if the character is leaning on something. Then it is better to pose starting with the palm, and then to correct the elbows and shoulders. And there is another very important point. When you pose a character, it is important to make sure that the local manipulator is selected, especially when you work with hinges, such as elbows or knees. At these points, the limbs can only rotate on certain axes. When the manipulator is in global mode, its axes do not coincide with the possible axis of rotation. That's why it does not rotate correctly. It causes displacement, and it strongly affects other parts of the body. In local mode, you can rotate the arm exactly along the correct axis. The legs work in a similar way. The foot translation affects the knee, but you can also rotate the whole leg from the hip. Cascadeur recognizes points of contact with the ground surface. Therefore, if the character is close enough to the ground, the points will deform if you try to lower them below the ground surface. These collisions can be turned off in Object Properties menu in the Floor Collision Relaxation Point tab. You should also bend the foot in local manipulator mode. However, when you move the feet on the ground, the global mode is more suitable. You can quickly switch between local and global modes with the tilde hotkey. If you lock the 3 toe points and then pull the base point of the foot up, you can put the character on its toes. When working with the feet, it is important to watch the knee and pelvis points. The knee cannot be turned to one side if the foot is turned to the other. If one foot is elevated above the ground, the hip above that foot is usually slightly down, because it no longer has any support on this side and gravity pushed it down. It will also affect the shape of the spine. Try to avoid sharp bends and zigzags in the back of the character, because the spine bends smoothly. Watch the back rotation controllers as well. The stomach cannot look the other way than the pelvis and the chest. If the pelvis is looking one way and the chest the other way, the stomach direction controller must be somewhere in the middle. Another useful thing to make work easier and faster is selection groups. You can use the number hotkeys to quickly select the points you want. In simple sense, such selection groups are already assigned. For example, if you press 1 on the keyboard, all points of the character's upper body will be selected. This is useful for shifting the entire character related to the feet. You can press 2 to select the character's upper part from the chest. Press 3 and 4 for selecting the arms. 5 and 6 are for the legs, and number 7 is the head. You can assign or reassign hotkeys to selection groups yourself. To set the hotkeys, select all the desired points, then hold down Ctrl and press any number key. Now, when you press this button, the corresponding points will be selected. Now it's time to tell more about the center of mass. Each group of 3 points is associated with one rigid body. Rigid bodies are special objects that define the physical behavior of a character. Each rigid body has its own size and mass. The center of mass is a point that represents the mass distribution. All objects and living creatures have a center of mass. When the center of mass is above the fulcrums, the object is in equilibrium. Some animals and humans can show true miracles of balance. They control the position of their center of mass by changing their poses, or by additional devices, such as Tinkstrop Walker's pole. Many of you probably know funny toys with such levitation effects. Due to the increased weight of its wings, this bird's center of mass is exactly in its beak, so it only needs to touch the surface with the tip of its beak to keep its balance. In Cascadeur, the projection of the center of mass is displayed on the ground. In stable poses, this projection should be under the fulcrums, or between them. To make it even easier to keep track of the center of mass, you can go into the settings, type center, and turn on this setting. Now a line is drawn from the center of mass to the ground, which makes it easier to see if the character is in balance. In this case, since the character is leaning to one leg, the center of mass will shift closer to it. This is what happens, for example, when you walk. Point controllers are the main controllers in the software. The principles of working with point controllers are the same for different characters. But there is another special type of controller for humanoid characters – autoposing. You can see and select autoposing controllers in the corresponding view mode. But first you have to activate the autoposing controllers by pressing this button. Not all characters have autoposing controllers, but only characters that have all the necessary points for this. For example, Chibi is a humanoid character, but it does not have controllers for its neck, chest, palms and feet, so autoposing cannot work with it. Autoposing is an intelligent tool for controlling a character's pose. It works on the basis of a regular rig, but it allows you to set poses faster and easier, because it takes control of some points. For example, you no longer have to keep an eye on the shoulders and rotation points in the body. Autoposing controllers can be active or inactive. Active controllers are those that are controlled by the animator. Inactive controllers are those points whose position is controlled by the computer. All large points are active controllers. You set certain positions for these points, and autoposing places the rest of the inactive points. The tool cannot move the active points, as if they were fixed for it. For example, when you move the neck point closer to the pelvis point, autoposing needs to place the points in the back between them. The distance between the points cannot change, which means that the character's back must bend. Also, autoposing cannot move the pelvis or neck points by itself, even if the pose is unnatural. In such a case, the deep learning-based autoposing logic remembers all the animations it saw during its training, in which the neck and pelvis points were in the similar positions to each other, and in these animations, the character's back was bent backward. Therefore, the autoposing places the inactive points in this way. All of this happens very quickly. Active controllers can affect the entire group of points. For example, the body rotates following the arm. Autoposing remembers that in animations where the arms were on this side of the body was usually rotated slightly. This makes perfect sense. Let's say that if you want to grab something, you will indeed start to turn your body along with your arm. But sometimes this behavior can be undesirable, and for this case, there is a directional controller in autoposing. As soon as you apply a manipulator to this controller, you activate it. This is indicated by the blue color. Now, this controller also affects the inactive points and corrects their position. It's as if you're tailing the tool. Yes, these points should be here, here and here, but consider also that the general direction should be like this. And now the tool needs to recall animations that take both of these moments into account. This way, you can make any point active. As soon as you select and move any inactive point, you will take control of that point. You can also make a point active by selecting it and pressing the Shift plus Z combination. With the same combination, you can return the point back to the inactive state. In this case, it will immediately take the position given by the active points. The more points are active, the more difficult it will be to work with the tool, because it has less and less freedom. Therefore, it is necessary to work consistently and to avoid creating too many active points. To do this, always start with the main active points, and then gradually add active points if it is necessary. It is especially recommended to avoid creating active points in the middle of chains, because it is difficult to work with them. For example, the elbows depend on the position of the palms, and instead of correcting the elbow itself, you can rotate the autoposing controller at the character's palm. It is the same with the knee. The direction of the knee is influenced by the points of the foot. To rotate the arm from the shoulder, you can select the main active arm controller and put the pivot on the shoulder point. This will rotate the arm from the shoulder without making any points of the arm active. Autoposing can greatly speed up and simplify your work. However, it is often necessary to refine the pose with more detail in regular controller mode. For example, in autoposing, it is difficult to control the rotation of the shoulder, while in point controllers it can be easily corrected. But there is one important note. If the pose was made with regular controllers, and then you turn on autoposing and activate any of the autoposing controllers, the pose will change. After all, the inactive points will immediately take the position that the active controllers tell them to take. It is possible to make important points active before applying the tool, or to fix them. But it is better to follow the order. First, you should create the rough poses in autoposing, and then refine them in the regular mode, not vice versa. By the way, if any of the points in regular rig is fixed, for which there is no corresponding point in autoposing, then tool will not work. It is best to think of autoposing as of a tool for quick sketching at early stage of animation. It's handy to start the animation to quickly sketch the basic keys, but then you may need more detailed control over each point. However, it's quite possible to make an animation using only autoposing. We still haven't mentioned another type of object – box controllers. Box controllers duplicate the regular controllers in many ways. You can control your character with both points and boxes. But for some parts of the character, there are only box controllers. These are the parts for which there are no rigid bodies, which means they can't affect the physical behavior of the character. For example, the fingers. The weight of the fingers in relation to the rest of the body is so low that they have no noticeable effect on the physical behavior of the character. Therefore, rigid bodies were not created for them in the first place, to keep the rig simple. However, it is still necessary to control the fingers, and this can be done with the help of box controllers. Since these box controllers are not connected to the physical skeleton, they behave a bit differently. For example, they do not affect the rest of the meshes. For objects like fingers, it is convenient to use the tail mode. When the tail mode is enabled, a small icon appears in front of the manipulator. Now I can select all the phalanges and bend them simultaneously. It's important to use both the manipulator and the tail in local mode. You can copy the entire pose or only the position of individual body parts from one key to another and even between different scenes. Of course, only if it is the same character in both scenes. The first three characters from the samples have the same skeleton and differ only in meshes, so you can copy the pose from the standard model to a simple one. To copy the position of the points, you have to select them and press Ctrl+C. Then you should select the same points on the target and set their copied position with Ctrl+V. However, copying can also be done locally or globally. When copying in global mode, the points will be copied to exactly the same coordinates in space. For example, in this scene, my character is standing in the middle of the grid, and I copy the position of its arm points. And in this scene, it may be standing in a different place. But when copying globally, the points will try to stand exactly where they were in the first scene. Only when I copy in local mode, the position of the points will be copied relative to the parent. For example, if the arm in this scene is rotated in such a way relative to the shoulder, then in copying, it will take into account only the position relative to this shoulder, although the shoulder itself is in a different place. This way, you can copy the position of the object relative to any pivot. For example, I want the left leg to have exactly the same distance from the right leg. Then I need to select the point of the second leg as a pivot. And I also need to activate relative to pivot mode. You can copy the position of the controllers or the joints themselves. This way, you can even copy animation from scenes without a rig. And the last tool I want to talk about in this video is the Mirror tool. You can find it in Cascadeur's main menu. For mirroring, you also need to select the controllers and the mirroring plane. If mirror pelvis position is selected, the character will be mirrored globally relative to the origin of coordinates. If one limb is selected, its position after mirroring will be symmetrical to the other limb. Now, I've probably told you enough about the technical part, but when it comes to poses, the artistic component is important too. There are a few tricks to get good poses in action animation. First of all, every good pose has a clear action line. This line should be straight or slightly arched, but if the line is broken, the pose will be read poorly. To learn how to recognize action lines better, you can practice making quick sketches. Use photos of athletes, fighters, dancers, or even comic books. For such sketches, you don't need to have to be talented in drawing. Your task is to capture the basic idea of a pose in a few seconds. To do this, it's enough just to draw a stickman. Over time, you will learn to quickly see the main line of action in different poses. In action animation, it's very important to make the pose look dynamic. There are a number of tricks that increase the dynamics. A straight angle at the knee looks static. A bend in any direction will add dynamics, even if it is just a small bend. You should also avoid parallel lines and identical positions of the arms or legs. Avoid incomplete poses. For example, in this pose the character is a bit relaxed, as if he a bit doubting. In the keyframes, the poses should be as clearly defined and finished as possible. If it is a lunge, then it should be as extreme as possible. the leg is straight and the character's entire attention is directed in the direction of the attack. However, this rule applies for dynamics. If the pose is static, then completely straight limbs will make it less natural. In static poses, the character can be slightly relaxed, just a little bit. To check how well the pose can be read, it is useful to switch on the silhouette mode, determine from what angle the viewer will see your animation, and look at the pose in silhouette mode. The human eye perceives an animation character as a spot, especially when it's an action animation where the movements are fast. During fast motion, it is important to immediately read the silhouette. The viewer doesn't have time to guess where the arm or leg is. Make sure that the body parts do not blend together. Also, make sure that important objects are not lost due to an inappropriate angle. For example, in this shot, it happened that the sword in the hand just disappeared. You need to be able to see it at least a little bit. And finally, a small but also important detail. Keep an eye on the direction of the character's gaze. If it's a punch, then the character needs to look where he's going to punch. If it's an obstacle to pass or an object to catch, the character must also see them first.